I'm very struck by how many hacks people come up with, talk about. It's all about optimizing for this and do it faster, better, easier. And stories pass something that instructions don't.
Welcome to Magic in the Moment, Mindfulness in Real Time. My name is Clayton Platt, and I'll be your host for this podcast journey. And for many people, practicing mindfulness has very little to do with sitting on a cushion, lighting incense, or even focusing on their breath. Just paying attention to what they're doing at any moment. And doing this intentionally can create that same magic. Our time together is intended to share how mindfulness plays out in everyday life for our guests. And before we begin, here's a word from our sponsor, Meditation for Leadership. We all feel it, the pressure to keep up, to perform, to push through. But lasting success doesn't come from speeding up. It comes from slowing down, leaning in, and creating the space to lead from within. That space is where we shift from autopilot to intention, building mindful habits that strengthen focus and calm. It's where we stay connected to our values and purpose, choosing to respond instead of react. It's where we unlock our potential to positively shape our own lives and empower others to grow and thrive. That's the work of Meditation for Leadership. If you're ready to create the space for sustainable success, visit meditationforleadership.org. Don't write about seeking. Share the story of what it's like to find what you sought. And that instruction came to Kira Higgs on day 2 of what was supposed to be a business book. She sat down in the summer of 2020 to write something practical, a map of the methods she'd used for years to help organizations unlock strategy and develop leadership. And then almost immediately, the book said no. Something quieter, something truer, more essential wanted to be written instead. I'm Clayton Platt, and this is Magic in the Moment, Mindfulness in Real Time. And my guest today is Kira Higgs. She's the author of Winnowing, a memoir of spiritual longing in secular life. And Kira spent decades as an award-winning communications strategist writing for executive leaders, all the while maintaining a meditation practice that was quietly rearranging her from the inside. And Winnowing is the book that emerged from that interior life. And it's not a how-to, not a prescription, but a memoir of the small, cumulative changes that happen, usually when we're not looking for change at all. So what I love about Kira's story and why I wanted her on this show is that she didn't leave her professional life to go find herself. She found herself inside it through the ordinary moments, through the practice, through the slow, patient work of paying attention. And that's what this show is about. And I think you're going to love this conversation. Kira, welcome to Magic in the Moment. I am so glad you're here.
Thank you, Clayton. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Kira, you sat down in 2020 to write a business strategy book, and on day 2, something like that, something shifted. And I'd love it if you could take us back to that moment. What did it feel like when you realized that wasn't the book that wanted to be written?
I was sitting at a desk in my home, and COVID had happened in I guess it was March of 2020. And I had decided to join through Seth Godin's network, Akimbo Network, a group of writers that said, we're going to get together, we're going to write, we're going to share our writing every day. I'll post it on the boards and get feedback. And at the end of whatever length of time we have, we're going to publish a book. And I thought, why not write a book about facilitation and strategy? I can give it to my clients. It'll save us a lot of time at the outset when I start an engagement. And I thought, I'm going to be so bored if I write that. My clients might like it, but I'm not going to enjoy the writing of it. So I just started writing stories that came back to me about my own life and things I cared about, things that mattered to me in the moment. And eventually the shape and the structure of the book came around to speak back to me and say, yeah, what you want to do is really capture moments from your life not because they're so great or so horrible. This isn't a memoir of healing for me. It's not a memoir of how to. It really was just this happened. And ultimately, if it led me to something called discovery and insight, and the dips helped that, then maybe my dips will help other people in recognizing when they're in the dip that it's not going to be all bad. They'll come out of it and a lot of good can emerge.
I really love that. I love the fact that you listened to what was important and meaningful and frankly interesting to you. It was meaningful, right? And that's what wanted to be written. And in that kind of journey of going through and going back into those moments of your life, it was a process of discovery. And to me, there's so much wisdom in that. And frankly, we don't do that enough. And I think that laying out to say, hey, I just started this process, started this journey, and I found out some really interesting things. As you said, it's not a how-to, because I've read it. And that's one of the things that struck me, Kira, was that it wasn't a how-to. It was like, this is what I did. And I found some really interesting things. It's not a bad thing to try, to get yourself present and pay attention to times in your life going backwards and then setting yourself up going forward about how to be really more aware and present about the person you'd like to be. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also add that Bernadette Jiwa is a master storyteller that I had gotten to know. I had worked with her as one of her coaches in a storytelling class and became convinced that stories, look at the Bible, it's like stories.
Yeah.
They're so much more powerful than instructions. And our culture is really interesting right now. I'm very struck by how many hacks people come up with, talk about. It's all about optimizing for this and do it faster, better, easier. And stories pass something that instructions don't. I don't understand what part of our brain it relates to, but I just know it's very true. So I drew on her as I was working on it. I reread Stephen King's book on writing. He's the horror story master, but he's got this beautiful book about writing, and took to heart that it would be through transparency and going into little details in life, that something would come to life on the page.
Yeah. And I think that the beauty there, as you mentioned, it wasn't like instruction. It's in the storytelling. In many respects, you're leaving it up to the reader to make their own conclusions, right?
Totally.
And you have your own personal conclusions and you share some of them, but in a lot of regards, it's the reader's job to read the story, to make their own interpretation, and to learn from it. And to me, that learning, I heard this in reference to your book from someone else. It's like leading breadcrumbs. Those breadcrumbs of, here's for the curious some ideas. You do it on your own way. I did it this way. Here are the things I discovered about myself. And there's so much beauty. And those stories basically are the impetus, I think, to the reader to say, wow, interesting. You know, she found this out about herself. And that was a very different kind of revealing story. I also want to underscore, I was so impressed with the vulnerability that you shared. And again, thinking about this as the person who started to write a business book, as a pivot, that was, it could not have been easy, right? I think it was important, but it couldn't have been easy to go into some of those dark places. Is that fair?
Great question, Clayton. I would say that my husband and I were talking about that a bit this morning. And I said, this book doesn't paint me in the best light. And I like that. It's pretty transparent. I'm not trying to make a case for how great I am or how awful I was or childhood was miserable or this was none of that. I had to go to like what I could see as real, because the realness is what mattered the most. The hard places to go, actually, I cried when I wrote the story about my younger sister and my father's anger one day. He took it out on her. I don't think he was actually mad at her, but he took it out on her and gave her this butcher job on her bangs, which just sent me into tears. And I cried again when I was writing it. I cried again when I was writing about his death and what it was like to see him through. Part of what was interesting wasn't so much the deeper, darker places for me that I needed to bring onto the page. I also didn't want anyone that I wrote about to be cast in a negative, sour light. I brought that chapter to my sister to say, are you okay if I publish this? My father's passed, so I couldn't ask him. My mother was okay with it, and she could be his surrogate. And then I also went to everyone who was in the book, I went to them to say, you appear, would you read this? Is this the same recollection you have of the moment? Are you okay with it? And there was only one person I was worried about. And when he got back to me, he was like, it's fine, go for it. So the portrayal in memoir is a very interesting thing. There's a lot of debate about what to do, what not to do. And I just wanted to be transparent. And I also wanted to find language as I was writing. You brought up earlier that people could find breadcrumbs. I don't think in the spiritual exploration of life, there's all that wide of a vocabulary. There's vocabularies within specific religions. But broadly speaking, to find language for that, which is difficult, it's felt, it's experienced, it's something you become aware of. You're not taught in a book. So there's not much language to go into the sublime, the subtle, the soft, the warm, the feeling of something, but not able to put your finger on it. So that was one of the things I was really interested in the book, was how to bring language so that a reader who has a little flame inside, but doesn't quite know how to articulate it to themselves, could read something in the book and go, oh, like I felt that. Oh, I recognize that. And it's like a little breadcrumb, maybe clue, maybe a little key for them to open the door for themselves, because now the language makes something more clear in their own mind. Makes it easier for them to pursue on their own now that they've got a little hook to understand what it is that they've been experiencing. I didn't have that when I was younger, and so I guess I wanted to offer that up through the book.
I think that is a gift. And I think that's reflecting on the sense that Winnowing is an offering, right? It's an offering to the public who will pick it up rather than a instruction book. And I think that's really clear and really valuable and really authentic. And I think that speaks to, in many respects, part of what kind of helped you along this journey, which is the meditation practice. And again, in meditation, in Magic in the Moment, my premise is that mindful moments happen in many different ways. It's important to seek being mindful in the moment, but we can do that in many different ways. And I know from talking to you that our specific meditation practices are different, and that's very cool. But I want to get back into that sense of what brought you into meditation, and how did that practice help inform, I guess, perhaps the change of focus in the book and or the specific areas in the book of impact? How did that kind of show up for you?
I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to bookmark so we come back to
Cool.
it, about
Yeah.
mindfulness in the moment. You have a fantastic blog, recent blog about athletes. So I want to come back to that because that's a big, I know we share mindfulness in sports. So
Cool.
I was living in Portland and I was taking some time off from work. A friend of mine who had learned how to space clear through Karen Kingston's methodology, very popular approach to energetic work in homes and buildings, space cleared my home. And she looked up at me at one point and she said, "Are you hungry for a spiritual practice?" And I said, actually, I am. I am. And it was great that she just posed the question. Again, allowed me to recognize that was quite true. So I bought a book based on the technique that she had been learning because I was seeing changes in her that she had wanted in her life. She was becoming the person she wanted to be. And I'm like, ooh, I don't want to be her, but I want the same thing for me. So I started that meditation, and just like they say with habits, it takes 30 or 40 days consistently to develop a habit. So I said, I'll do this for 30 days. I set up my meditation mat in the corner of my bedroom so I'd have to walk by it on the way to the bathroom and I wouldn't forget to meditate. I did about 15 to 20 minutes a day. And here's what happened. I did do the 30 days. And then afterwards, if I missed it, my day was nowhere near as good. It was, the evidence was black and white. Black and white. And it's as if every time I sat to meditate, I was plugging into something that was bigger than me and stayed plugged into it the whole day. It wasn't speaking to me, it wasn't dropping instructions in my lap, but it did approximate something that we call flow. I'm not saying I was in the flow, but it was in that direction. And then when I didn't meditate, things felt very clunky and crunchy, and little things would become obstacles in the day that in other days they just weren't. So that was very compelling to me. And then I went into some deeper work with the school that I ultimately started studying with and discovered that consciousness is this expanse that we will never exhaust. Think about the creation. Where did the creation come from? If you can source all the way back to that, you'd be really be getting somewhere. And it just became such a mystery worth dedicating time to explore. It became in many ways richer than much of what waking life could be, even though I love waking life. I have a wonderful life. I like what I do when I'm not asleep. But this was beyond that.
And it really seems that the ability to be more present, more aware through the basis, and I want to come back to how you establish that practice in just a second, because that to me is really important. But that the constant being able to pull yourself into the moment in that practice creates a stronger awareness muscle so that all the other things in your life that you're working on suddenly become, I don't want to say obvious, but more apparent. And when we're doing things in alignment with what our North Star says, we can notice that feels good and we're in sync, we're in flow. But if we're off a little bit, that awareness sends up a doo-doo. It's okay. And your friend, my wife, has said to me, my 25 years of meditation certainly haven't created a perfect being, but I'm definitely a little less of a jerk. And that progress, and I know, honestly, I am more aware when I'm a jerk or when I have been a jerk. So those little things.
I can really relate to that. Totally relate to that. Not you being a jerk. My awareness when I'm spun off on something that's really not pleasant to be around.
Yeah. And so what I love is that for you, the connect with the spiritual journey, which is different from the spiritual journey that most people are accustomed to, which would be associated more with religion. This was something that was, I want to say, deeper, connected with the universe, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, the beauty of going on a path, a spiritual journey that at the same time has very practical implications to being your best self. That to me is fantastic and such a great argument for taking the time to sit. Yeah. And
let me say something about that, because I think you're totally right. You're totally right. When I tried meditation early years, sometimes I could get into a state. So I went to a gathering of the Guru Mai group in New York, and it was blissful. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I could not replicate it. But even if I came a little bit close to it on my own practice, when I opened my eyes and came back into the world, it was like such a sharp, painful reentry because something had felt so expansive and soft and holding. And then to come back into the mundane that has all these like crunchy things in life.
Yeah.
The practice I do doesn't stop when we get off the mat. So we learn as a method, a technique, how to, we're not meditate. You can't meditate as you move. You got to have your eyes open and be focused and concentrated. You don't drive a car while you're meditating.
Right.
But that would be disastrous. But we learn how to hold a certain form of receptivity that's not as deep as meditation, but nevertheless is not just the ordinary mind running amok. And that kind of balance, back to your point about knowing when you're becoming a jerk, it's a self-awareness that comes from general awareness, and it becomes a truing device and a listening awareness device. And it becomes a really virtuous cycle because the more you learn how to do that, not only do you become more aware of yourself, you become more aware of what's happening around you. When somebody needs comfort more than objective perspective, when opening is more valuable than defending, when defending is more important than softening, you start to be able to gauge things more accurately and then move more smoothly with what's happening in the moment and not by prescription and not by rules of behavior that you were taught.
Yeah. That sense of what I heard you describing to me is that sense of equanimity, right? That balance. I love the when it's important to be open and less defensive, and when it's important to draw the line and set boundaries. And that to me is that equanimous nature of knowing the strong back, soft front kind of thing, and being able to distinguish in the moment what's needed. And you talk about the small cumulative changes that happen. And you also talked about that 40-day process of getting into the habit. And it makes me think of James Clear and Atomic Habits. And that I love his image of like the ice cube in the kitchen, right? And if the temperature in the kitchen is 28 degrees and you're going up a degree per minute or whatever, it's going to take a certain amount of time before you see any change. But it's happening, right? It's actually occurring under the surface. You may not see it or recognize it, but those little changes are happening, and they have a wonderful cumulative effect over time. At that moment, each day of that first 40 days, it wasn't like, oh, I'm a different person. This has changed. It's like all those little things. And that's so important to appreciate and not try to force the issue that today it's going to be earth shattering. Sometime it may be earth shattering, but those little moments, those little changes are what are needed to build the case, so to speak, and also to be sustained. So do you want to go back to the question about the athletes?
Yes, I do. I love what you wrote on that blog about athletes and what it means to be mindful as an athlete. You want to share a little bit about what inspired you to write it?
Sure. It was really from a global perspective, it was Olympics, right? And it was Alyssa Liu and Lindsey Vonn, and how very different their experiences were in the Olympics, and how for Alyssa Liu, it was like, here's a woman who at 14 was the national champion female ice skater and figure skater. And by 16, she was done. And she realized that she had been skating for other people. She'd been performing for other people. And until she became aware of what was her why, what was her motivation, her incentive to be back on the ice, it wasn't going to work. But when she got back, it was simply to unleash her inner spirit And that became so obvious if anybody was watching her perform, was like mind blowing. And then Lindsey Vonn, it's like, people were like, why are you ever going to go on that ski slope? Just having had, I think it was ACL surgery less than 6 months ago. And she was like, I need to do this for me. It's not for you. Right. And then this sort of translates for me personally. So as an athlete, even at my somewhat advanced age, what inspires me to be on the court and move away from the impetus having to win a point. Yeah, it's important. You're competing, but really it's actually, there's some joy here. And I can be grateful for, at the age of 70, being able to play squash or padel or whatever. And also to be with people that I enjoy. So that was the impetus for me.
Beautiful. We share squash in common.
Yeah,
And I had played tennis in retrospect. A lot of it was about, I love the game, but in my young years, a lot of it was about being close to my dad. And squash was actually really refreshing to me because he didn't play. It was all mine. It was all my sport. I didn't start until I was a senior in high school. Played in college. But then I got to New York and was competing in pretty high-level tournaments there and had this strange knee injury that took me out for about almost a year. And when I came back, the knee, no one could explain what was going on with my knee. I wonder if it was just psychosomatic, frankly. There was a lump there, but no one could explain what was going on with it. When I came back, my game was entirely different. And I was only playing the ball. It was the relationship between me and the ball, not my opponent, and not the desire to rack up another win on whatever scoreboard that is, just the ball. And my experience of the sport that year was so completely joyful. It was very quiet. It was very intimate because it was just me and the ball. It's probably what they mean when they talk about the zen of whatever sport you're playing. But I am so grateful that in my life I had a phase where that happened. And I feel like it was akin to mindfulness, awareness, and also a sense of motivation that came from a very pure place, not a egotistical place, little ego place. So when I was applying myself, it was really for the joy of the game, the love of the sport. And that gave me this almost like bubble to operate in where everything became so visible, the angles, the speed. My awareness was so heightened by the care and the affection that I brought to the subject of the game. And I think that's something else maybe we don't talk about enough. There's awareness in general life, but there's also how awareness can be awakened because we are doing something that we really care deeply, purely about. And that can be a real portal, a real door opener.
what you described about that shift for you on the squash court seems absolutely parallel to Alyssa Liu, because the joy that she was demonstrating on the ice was like, that was for her. It wasn't, yes, she's competing and you're there to win a medal, but she wasn't there to win a medal. She was there to express herself and in so have some joy, have some fun. And that takes away, you mentioned like the ego out of it, the chatter, the all the distraction of you got to do this, you didn't do that, and listening to those little voices, which are omnipresent, and being in that moment, it just for you focusing on the ball, on the angle, versus, oh, I got to do this because my opponent is doing that, or this is a particular opponent I've played a few times and I really want to show them, versus, no, this is, ooh, I just saw something I never thought, boom, and hitting it. And the ability, to clear away the clutter, the ego, all the expectations, and allow the body just to do what the body has been training to do, it's liberating. And I think it comes into that same sense of winnowing. It's letting go of all that baggage that's associated with, I've trained, my coach says this, my teammate. Okay, just let that go. So that's beautiful. That is beautiful. It's a great example. And it doesn't come out, what you just expressed, didn't come out in the book. There's lots of other things that came in the book.
It's our private moment. It's our private moment, Clayton. And I'm so happy to share it with you.
That's right. It's our private moment. No one is ever going to know about that. I appreciate you circling back to that, because to me, that's a perfect example of how mindfulness can play out in real time. So for some people, we're talking about it in real life, in their relationships, at work, on the playing field, and on the court. And our ability. So for you at that time, I'm sensing, would you equate that? Were you in a practice at that point from a meditation standpoint, or was that something that was just totally different? You just happened to find that flow?
I was not in a meditation practice. I had done quite a lot of work with Est, which became Landmark later on. So there had been some clearing of the decks through that. Honest to God, I think it was just a tremendous amount of grace. I think it was just a tremendous amount of grace. And it was I want to say one other thing about what can happen in those moments and in real life in a awareness practice. This is becoming esoteric here, Clayton, so I'm going to bring a little bit more in. My experience of having now learned how to not only meditate, but apply vision, like deepen my vision scientifically for sure, but also spiritually. There's a lot of instruction notice available to all of us all the time that we miss. And what I mean by that is we don't live in a strictly material world. I can't put under the microscope what my meditations look like, but they're very tangible. They're very textural. And I've come to understand that there's a lot that comes to us from realms of support. Very quiet. They don't blare. No horns blowing, but little instruction notices. Why does somebody know to not take a turn on a certain road? And I'll find out later that there was something really dangerous going on there. Like you could call it intuition. That's fine. You could call it vision. But I feel like instruction notice is actually an even more mechanical, technical, accurate term, that we're getting input. And when we're receptive and aware, as in you mentioned earlier, not that chatter, not that ongoing self-talk, repeating conversations or to-do lists or distractions. When we're open, it's like our radar can catch the signal and then we can respond. And I feel like that's what was happening on the squash court for me in milliseconds. I was playing the game because I was open to the instruction notices, move this way, move that way. The training had been done. I had played for years. I'd practiced, I drilled, I competed. But then at the most refined level, I could operate differently because my receptors were open and responsive. And I think that's back to what you were saying earlier about the cumulative. When you do that over hours, days, weeks, months, years, you come to something you can really rely on. And it becomes magical because it's not formulaic. It doesn't repeat itself from one day to the next. The practice is repeatable, but what you get from the practice is different each day.
Yeah, I think about just visualizing what you were talking about. And again, that sense of, if you've done something enough, that you can actually move forward without kicking in the prefrontal cortex. The executive mind doesn't necessarily have to play, because instinctually there's an awareness. And I apologize to people who are bored by conversation by squash, but I'm thinking about people that I've seen who are so good and they come up to a ball, and if I'm hitting it, I've got a couple choices, right? And if I'm thinking at the time, I'm going to boom, hit the tin and the point's going to be over. But I'm seeing these people who've been playing for years and they're so in the flow, and the algorithms, like, they're 50 ways they can hit the ball and they just do it. It's like at the moment, just the right choice happens. And I think it's that awareness that the body has, or the spirit, or whatever you want to say, but it's not the chatter. It's not the executive mind or the ego or anything playing into that. And I think there are parts of the brain that are attuned to that, and allowing them to be present and active is what's needed. And I think if we can take this, we can move this into other aspects of life. We can bring this into relationships. We can bring this into the workplace. And I wonder, from your standpoint as a consultant in the leadership space, how do you navigate the stuff that you've learned that's helped you so much and bring that into the practical? Is it by simply personal example? Are there ways that you share this with people without saying, look, if you're going to be better at what you're doing, you have to sit on the cushion with me? How do you handle that sort of understanding that you want people to allow themselves to be present and aware, but they might be resistant to some of the techniques that maybe are appealing to you and me and have been part of our lives, but they don't resonate with them?
What a great question. I never talk about spirituality and meditation with clients. It was interesting with the book to actually let them know I'd written it, because some of them, there's a side of me they wouldn't have known. I became a structural consultant. I started studying it in 2017, and then got certified in 2019. It was like coming home for me at a business level, because as a Robert Fritz was the person back in the 80s who wrote a book called The Path of Least Resistance. And it's all about how do you create and what gets in the way of your creating what you want in life. And when I met him in person and engaged with his work, it was like coming back home to truth, to reality. That's where I work with my clients. And what I bring to them is a combination of looking like from a clean slate. Like, I start with nothing. And that's one of the hardest things for structural consultants to learn to do. I don't bring a theory in or a model in or a set of how-tos. I just start with nothing, and we look together, whether it's one person or their team. Now, what I do as a consultant structurally, I also combine with my own spiritual practice around being present, being with what's really happening, naming it, clarifying it, but also looking out into the future, because my clients want strategy. They want to see how to get from A to B over the course of time. And I have found that there's something I do that I don't do consciously. And this comes out of, I think, my spiritual practice. I've noticed that when I work with groups, what happens invisibly is that people start to unconsciously connect with the bigger part of them. The maybe more neutral part, less agendaed part of themselves. They relax, they move into something that's a little more flow-like. I'm not taking them through flow exercises. We're doing what we need to do, and this is happening alongside. And it really shifts what they can do together, because when the people in a room, in a group, have transposed into a bigger part of themselves that actually does know how to really genuinely collaborate, that actually wants something bigger than just my next raise or my next promotion or my next job. Like, when they really want something together and I'm working with them, that's when the magic starts to happen. Now, they wouldn't describe it this way. I can only tell you this after seeing it over many sessions and looking back and going, what's been happening? What? Like, that group could have stumbled along the whole time. They didn't. They got to this higher elevation to do their work together. How did that occur? And I think it's a combination of the structural consulting training and then what it is that I discovered can happen through my own practice transferred to a group. It's not my practice just for me or my family or my life, but there's some kind of halo effect that it has when I work with teams. And they're the beneficiary without my ever having to name it.
It's interesting because as you described that, the halo effect, I think, is a perfect way to shine the light on it, because it is, in many respects, by your modeling without preaching. Again, just the way you're bringing this there, you're consulting, setting the stage. And we talked about this, I think, maybe before, being the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. You're not telling them what to do. You talked about coming with a blank slate and, in essence, allowing them through their individual and then team collaboration to come up with the plan themselves. The beauty of that is, one, when it's come from within them, they own it. They're inspired and incentivized to make it happen because
the motivation is really genuine. The motivation is real. And that motivation is a huge thing to ride on. Yes. Yeah, they own it.
And then the other thing was that when people discover in a group they're working on a project together with a unified purpose, a couple of beautiful things happen. You've described how this happened. The result of this is a project that gets done and gets done on time, and et cetera, et cetera. And they're wonderful things that occur to an individual and a team in a workplace when that occurs. But Daniel Pink wrote about that in his book Drive. It's like the motivation frequently is just to do something, to accomplish something. And the other thing, though, as a team, you drop so many of the barriers, the divisiveness, the exclusions, when you have a unified purpose. And in many respects, sometimes your heartbeats start synchronizing. And when that happens, Katie barred the door. It's just like only good things are going to happen because there's a unification of purpose and energy. And so what I love hearing, Kira, is that you're able to help facilitate that without taking people on a mystical journey. They're doing it in real life. And hopefully, for some of them, there's like what just happened? Right? And maybe...
Yeah, often, Clayton, that I hear that a lot. I'll tell you in a moment, but keep going.
No, I want to hear you say this. Go ahead. Go for it.
Always at the end of an engagement, I'll go around the room and we'll take 5 minutes and I'll just, how has this experience been for you? The most recent one I did, to a person, everybody said, I've never done it like this before. I've been in so many of these. This is the time flew. We ended up with something that's really concrete. I know we can get it done. They were like on a little magic carpet floating through every one of them. And I felt so badly that they'd been through awful planning sessions before in their past, but that they could have now an experience of what's possible. And one thing I really do like to do when I'm working with clients is leave them with greater capacity themselves. So having experienced it and seen how I do it, there's ways in which they can carry it on without my having to be there. But yeah, they're surprised. They're like, they almost can't find words. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. I can imagine for you, just watching that happen and seeing the transition from beginning to end and seeing people being so surprised. There's an amazing gratification. And quite honestly, it's like the beauty of that is that's what you're being paid to do. And how much fun to get paid for something that you witness as a minor miracle, right?
It's the transition for them. It's fun. On day one, there's always a few people you can just either see or feel the eye rolls, the arms crossed, the here we go, show me. And then when they start leaning in, it's really a delight.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So I want to, if we can, circle back to the book a little bit. I love where we've gone in this conversation because I'm such a fan of the book. And for anybody who's listening or watching, Winnowing is just so worthwhile. Take an opportunity. We're going to put the links in the show notes for how you can go to Amazon and you can download your Kindle. You can buy the paperback. It's so worthwhile. But I want to go back to the book and just share one of the things that was really most meaningful to me. It put me in a space of, how can I put this? I was really transformed by your description of dealing with your dad when your relationship was not in a good place. And I would describe it as estranged at the very least. And then you hear that he's very sick. And I would love, if you don't mind, just take me through that experience and then if you will, also the postmortem experience. To me, that was profound reading and made a huge impact on me. If you don't mind, I'd love you just to kind of walk me through that.
Sure. I bet a lot of people have said that's maybe the most important chapter in the book to them. Yes, I was a bit estranged from my father, and he's a good man, and we had seen something very differently it was a painful disagreement. And my sister called and said, Dad's not well, he's got pancreatic cancer. And I was frankly not in a shining moment with her on the phone at that time. I felt testy and irritated and annoyed with the news even. But then let it settle and realized that I needed to go see him and I wanted him to also meet my husband-to-be. They had not met yet. So we made a trip to Georgia from the West Coast, and it was a bit of a patching things back without having to process a whole lot. And then when the time came for his death, all the kids, the four of us, had rotated through to care for him. And I, again, the instruction notice knew that I was going to be the last one to stay on. I bought a one-way ticket. I didn't know when I would be coming home, but I knew it wouldn't be all that long. It ended up being about 3.5 weeks. He fought to the end. His animal body didn't want to let go. That was actually really powerful to witness how much the animal body wants to keep living. And when he died, it was about 4 a.m. My mom was on, she and I were the two people on rotation. She was with him when he died, and she was singing to him, which when I learned that brought tears to my eyes. And she came up around 8 a.m. and she said, your father's passed, and he's downstairs. When I went into the bedroom, it was profound. The atmosphere was very different from the rest of the house. I felt presences, not just one, but it was like some, I don't know, team of angels had spread across the room, and I could just feel the way they were holding him. And it was it was like I could touch it. It was so evident. And come to find out, a lot of doctors and hospice workers in this field know this space. It's not uncommon to them at all. And his body was taken out of the house that day. And that evening, I started reading to him. So this is a practice that I do for people who have died, because there's a transition space. You've left your body, Whether it was a sudden accident or a long death, there's still a known of physicality, and then entering into an unknown space of consciousness that can be unsettling and a bit jarring. And the purpose of reading is to support the newly dead, to support that spirit, that soul, in acclimating to that initial change, and then also helping them find the light that will ultimately lead them back to, we'll just call it higher ground, at a spiritual level. So the experience was pretty profound. My father was an engineer, and when I started reading to him, I was like, my goodness, Dad is having a blast. He is really kicking it here. Because having been released from this painful, like pancreatic cancer is an awful way to go. It's just, you're just racked with pain and drugs to deal with the pain. He was liberated. And all of the ways that he could just explore, his curious mind was like on steroids in this space, just this and that. Oh, this is how that works. And like doors flying open to all these engineering type mysteries of the universe that he could just plow himself into. So I was like, okay, good. He's in good shape here. And then I felt like I was experiencing his spirit separate from the role of dad, separate from the human man, just who he was as an unleashed spirit before he was born and after he died, this eternal part of him. And it was magnificent to me. It was really a pleasure. And then as the weeks and the days and weeks went on, the experience of him with me slowly was fading because he was moving into these places he needed to go. So it got a lot like a fade out on an audio or a visual, just fade to black. But it was very slow. And then when he was really fully lifted and no more work for me to do, it was very sad for me because that's why I called it Gone Then Gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure every time you go through that, it's like it's tugging at you a little more. And a couple of things came to my mind. One was the description of reading and leading the departed, giving them hints along the journey. I'm not an expert on this, but I have seen references to how the indigenous populations deal with the crossover of members of their families and their communities and giving them hints. And in some of the ritual, there's this guidepost. And I think there's a beauty in that and it makes sense. I also, and in many respects, this can be how we close this circle, Kira, is I'm thinking about when you made that journey, you bought that one-way ticket and you came to be with your dad. As you described it in the book, it was like it was starting with a clean slate. And you had winnowed away a lot of the previous stuff in the relationship that would have, in essence, created barriers to being present with the person who needed you, going through all that you described. And how that's parallel to how you do your work in your consulting work. And that then makes this consistence. This is Kira with her family in an incredibly important moment. And this is Kira with her clients. It's like bringing that curiosity, that clean slate, that removing the expectations and all the baggage of our presumptions. Leave that aside. Let me just be here. And that's beautiful. And you demonstrate that in such wonderful ways. And the book, and among so many other reasons, that's a huge reason to read the book because it shows the beauty of that. Again, it's not saying, okay, this is how you do it. You can get some hints. But the end result is just being where you need to be in the space that you need it to be. That's a marvelous thing. And I applaud that. I applaud your personal commitment to that. And I really applaud your willingness to spend the years writing about it in a way that, quite frankly, is very meaningful and impactful. And It is an offering to the public, to the universe, and it is gratefully accepted. So thank you for that, Kira.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for reading it, for taking it in, and for sharing your reflections. It really means a lot.
And thank you so much for spending this time. I have this feeling that this won't be our last conversation about this, that we can share. I'd love to circle back and see down the road where things are and where the path continues to lead you. But you are a wonderful light, and I'm so glad to spend this time with you and looking forward to spending more time with you personally in the future.
Thanks, Clayton. Likewise, and thank you for all that you're doing to bring this message.
Hey, thanks for listening. I want to give a big shout out to John Gehring of Story Trust Media for his expert editing and wonderful production guidance. I also am deeply grateful for the ongoing support I receive from Meditation for Leadership and their sponsorship. So that's all for now. Until next time, this is Clayton Platt saying, watch for those moments of magic when mindfulness shows up in real time in your life.